I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of campaign group Transparency Task Force. We are a certified social enterprise with a UK base. However, we do have people involved with or participating in our activity in 20 countries around the world. In broad terms, our purpose is to shine a big bright light on things that are happening in the financial sector that we believe are bad for the industry, i.e. because they cause reputational damage, also bad, of course, for consumers. So our mission, our purpose is to reform the financial sector so it serves society better. Many of you here tonight are here because you are the victims of one investment or pension scandal or another. Most of you are here because, unfortunately, you're some of the 300,000-ish victims of what we generally call the Woodford scandal, a scandal that was all about a rock star fund manager and his fall from grace. But in so many ways, it's even more than that. It's not just about what Neil Woodford and his firm did. It's about how the establishment, how the regulatory framework has dealt with it ever since. You'll know as well as I do, folks, that there's much speculation about why, in particular, why the FCA doesn't seem to have handled all this very, very well. And it's for that reason that I am especially grateful that Tom Winifrith is with us tonight. For those of you that don't know Tom, he's the founder of Share Profits, which is all about helping people who want to know what's going on in the markets, what's really going on in the markets, to understand what's happening. He has a very, very large and well-deserved readership base. I'll pop a link to Share Profits website when Tom is speaking. Have a good look around that. Those of you who are investors would, I think, benefit from becoming a part of the community that Tom has worked very hard and in a very high integrity way to build over the years. So we rate Tom very highly. We're really pleased that he's here. Tom, in just a moment, I'm going to pass over to you. Would you mind, for those who may not be familiar with Share Profits and yourself, Tom, would you mind giving us a little bit of a background and then go into your story about Woodford, about what you did to try to wave a big red flag on numerous occasions, about how the FCA have handled it, and frankly, speak as candidly as you are known to speak. Over to you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Share Profits was set up in 2013, which is just about the sort of start of the time that Neil Woodford was thinking of setting up on his own, Woodford Investment Management, having left Perpetual. We don't normally look so much at funds. Our speciality is looking at companies, individual companies. We're not universally liked for that. I have a picture up on my wall. I can't remember whether it's in the house I have here or the Greek hovel I live in, halfway up a mountain in the middle of nowhere. But it's a load of the death threats that I've received over the years from people who resent what I've written. There's another set of cuttings with a set of lawyers' letters that I've received over the years from various crooks who resented being exposed. People don't like it. The easy way to win popularity in the financial markets is to say, everything's cheap, fill your boots, buy, buy, buy. Saying that things are frauds or pointing out that companies lie or that they're doing things wrong doesn't make you popular. I think I'm one of the most hated people in Britain, but I sleep soundly at night. We first came across, well, I first wrote about Neil Woodford in 2015. And I do, and I think Andy thinks I'm a little harsh on this, I do contrast our treatment of Neil Woodford with that of the mainstream press. Right from the first time that we wrote about Woodford, we were sceptical. Share Profits doesn't have a house view, by the way. It's individual writers, but all of the individual writers who wrote about Neil Woodford, myself, a fellow writing under the nom de plume Cynical Bear, and my colleague Nigel Somerville, we were all cynical. We were rightly sceptical. By contrast, the mainstream media was universally bullish about Woodford, almost up to the bitter end. Woodford was the man who'd made Middle England rich. Was it the BBC or the Daily Mail? I forget. One of them said that. When we were asking very serious questions, the mainstream press was still running supportive stories on him, running puff pieces. I remember very close to the bitter end, which was about 3 weeks before the gating of the Equity Income Fund. I went to the AGM of Woodford Patient Capital Trust. I'd taken the precaution of buying 10 shares in the company so that I knew I'd be able to get into the AGM. The journalists there, and there were a couple, had just assumed they'd be let in because they'd been so nice to Woodford over the years. Woodford changed the rules for that AGM to try and keep me out because I'd warned him I'd be there and said you had to be a shareholder. So I produced my letter from my stockbroker and showed that I'd invested £8 to buy the 10 shares, which are now worth more or less nothing. And I gained admittance. At that time, I saw the reporter from the Financial Times pleading to be allowed in, pleading for a one-on-one interview, saying, you know, we've always been very kind to him. Why didn't you let us in? At that meeting, Woodford dismissed all of the concerns that I'd raised, not just about Woodford Patient Capital Trust, but about the liquidity issues facing Woodford Equity Income Fund as rubbish. He said all of the bad news about Woodford was down to inaccurate press reporting, and the worst sinner, the worst offender with his fake news is that man, Mr. Winifred. He singled me out. Within 2 or 3 weeks, the Equity Income Fund had to be gated. It was so obvious that it was going to be gated. We were monitoring on an almost daily basis in the run up to the gating the liquidity position of the Equity Income Fund. What percentage of the fund was in liquid stocks? What percentage was in illiquid stocks? And what was the daily rate of redemptions? So for about 6 months prior to the gating, we were putting the question, it's not where if, but when it is gated. At the same time, if you look at the mainstream media, and the worst offenders were the FT and the Mail on Sunday. I'm afraid to say Jeff Prestridge, he was saying, they're all saying Woodford's having a wobble. He's having a bad time, but he'll come through in the end. It should have been really very obvious that that wasn't the case. But actually, there were red flags much, much earlier. When Woodford sought to gain authorization from the FCA for the setting up of Woodford Investment Management, that was around 2014. It was a year after he'd been awarded a CBE. The establishment loved him. It's not entirely clear which member of the establishment helped him to get the CBE, which member nominated him, although he did live frightfully close to the constituency of the then Prime Minister David Cameron. It's not quite clear why the FCA also authorised him. Because you see, the day after or the week after he left Perpetual, the FCA fined Perpetual for 34 counts of breaching its rules on disclosures, on liquidity issues, on all the sort of things which you need to ensure happen to make sure that funds remain liquid and viable. And guess which funds was responsible for every single one of those breaches? Those were funds managed by Neil Woodford. If the FCA had had any sense whatsoever, it would have said, look, enough is enough. You've risked it. Now, Perpetual's big enough to ride the storm, but you are not the sort of person who should be managing other people's money because of your behaviour. The FCA always makes the mistake of sanctioning firms rather than individuals. So if we wind forward to this year, And we're told that Woodford is going to be fined 6 million quid personally. Now, he's appealed. And Woodford Investment Management is to be fined 40 million pounds, and it's appealing. You're seeing that Neil Woodford's getting away with it. The truth is that Woodford Investment Management doesn't have a penny to its name. All the money has been taken out by Neil Woodford and Craig Newman and put into other vehicles or into their own back pockets. So the 100 million quid or so which Woodford made from the inception of Woodford Investment Management up until today, that Woodford and Newman made, is largely safe. Woodford owns 65% of Woodford Investment Management, so it's fair to say that he's made 65 million quid. Maybe he's had to pay tax on that. I'm sure he has paid tax on that. But that would still be what, 35, 40 million quid? Paying a 6 million quid fine is absolutely nothing. The 40 million fine for Woodford Investment Management will never be paid. The message here is that doing bad things pay. I ask any one of you, if I were to tell you, you can have 40 million quid, you have to pay 6 million quid back in a fine, and you're never allowed to work again, would you take that as an offer? I bet you even Andy would be tempted by that. Yeah, Andy would do it. I'd be almost tempted by it as well. You'd have to be superhuman not to. And that is another failing of the FCA. Not only does it ignore past bad behaviour when someone is a member of the great and the good, but then they go after corporate targets, not individuals. It's never a company, in my experience, that commits fraud. It's never a company that puts out a misleading RNS. It's never a company which has very dodgy accounts. It's individuals who do all of those things. And that's one of the big failings of regulation in this country, is we've forgotten that. In every single case of corporate wrongdoing, I would like to see the companies not fined a cent, because probably its shareholders have suffered enough already. What you need to see is individuals fined a life-changing experience and then sanctioned. For me, the fair penalty would be for the FCA to assess how much money Neil Woodford has taken out of Woodford Investment Management after tax. Should we call it 40 million quid? And then to fine him 40 million pounds and 1 penny, to bankrupt him and say he can never work again. That would be a suitable punishment, but B, it would be a deterrent to others. It would send out a clear message. Now, you may say that Woodford hasn't committed a crime. I would argue that's not true. He's quite happy to sue me if he wants to, but he won't get very far. We documented between 2015 and about 2020, we documented the failings of Neil Woodford in more than 1,000 articles, podcasts, and video presentations. There was ample opportunity for the FCA to act on them. The FCA subscribes to share profits. One of the presentations was given in front of 1,500 people in London. It was videoed. We put it up on the internet with free access to all. There can be no excuse for the FCA not to have paid attention to that. They subscribe to share profits. They take our work seriously. They act on our work. But they didn't with Woodford, because he was either one of the great and the good, or arguably he was too big to fail. Or potentially, if the FCA did act against him and it was just sitting there crossing its fingers, hoping the problem would go away, if it did act against him, then questions should be asked about why the hell did you authorize him in the first place? And why didn't you act earlier? Now, there are questions people have. Did Neil Woodford do things that were materially wrong, borderline criminal? Well, I just offer up a couple of examples. There was a company called Rutherford Health. It was involved in creating machines which are a very specialist treatment for cancer. They're not applicable for most cancer patients, just a very small number. I knew a little bit about proton beam therapy, as it was called, because I'd exposed another company in the same space, Advanced Oncotherapy, which has since gone bust. I exposed the dodgy dealings in it by Crispin Odey, the alleged sex pest fund manager. I exposed the insider dealing by a former Tory MP on the board. It really had everything. I exposed the fact that it was lying to investors and it went bust. But it gave me some idea about the potential for proton beam therapy. It's such a small market that arguably Britain could only really support 3 centres. Well, the NHS had 3 already. Advanced was trying to build one in London, and Rutherford was trying to build another 4. And there was another company trying to build some as well. It didn't add up. I knew it didn't add up, and that was my starting block. But Woodford took a different view because Woodford always knew better. Remember, this is a man who invested in a company which needed to change the laws of nuclear physics for its business plan to work. He had some strange ideas on investment. Woodford put in a large amount of money to Rutherford at a very low price. There was then a subsequent funding round at a much, much higher price, into which Woodford put a very small amount of money. He cornerstoned that secondary round of funding, but it was a very small one. The company didn't really need the money. But it meant that the shares in Rutherford Health, held in the Patient Capital Trust, but also in, I think, unbelievably, the Equity Income Fund, though the chances of it paying a dividend were about as great as me winning the 100 meters at the next Olympics. The effect of this was that Woodford was able to write up the value of his much larger initial investment. And therefore, his assets under management went up. That gave a false sense of the net asset value of the unit trusts and the investment trust, and meant that he was able to charge greater fund management fees. Ching ching, lucky Neil. It then got worse. The tale of Rutherford really is instructive. Woodford suddenly found himself under pressure from his ACD because the percentage holdings in the Equity Income Fund and the other fund he managed, which were in unlisted companies, were greater than 10%. That was something which was a breach of guidelines if you're running an OIC, an open-ended trust. Now, Woodford got around that in several ways. One was he encouraged a number of companies he'd invested in to list on the Channel Islands Stock Exchange, even though the free float was 0. But by doing that, he could claim that they were now listed companies, not unlisted companies, and dodge the metric. Now, the FCA should have seen through that. They should have said, look, there are going to be no share trades in it at all. So its liquidity position in these companies is exactly the same after the listing as it was before the listing. But it ticked the FCA's boxes. The FCA is a great one for if you tick all the boxes, then that's fine. I've made the observation before that my first girlfriend is someone very senior at the FCA. I won't humiliate her by revealing her name, but she was a virtuous girl, which is why she saw the back of me pretty quickly. But she's typical of the staffers there, incredibly virtuous. They couldn't think about how doing something wrong, you might be naughty by ticking their boxes, but actually your motives aren't entirely pure. And I'm afraid that is the way that FCA staffers are. What they need is a few more rogues and villains out there on their books, and a few less corporate lawyers who wouldn't dare parking on a double yellow line. Back to Rutherford. The route out for Rutherford was that the company decided to list on the Aquis market, the most junior and illiquid market in London. By doing that, it would become a listed company. And so Neil Woodford would get through the box tick exercises on liquidity again. The company announced via the Sunday Times that it was seeking to raise, I think from memory, £100 million at an even higher valuation than the joke funding round beforehand, which would have allowed Woodford to mark up the value of his holdings again. This is the dishonesty of the Deadwood Press. The Deadwood Press didn't look at this and say, hang on a second, this is a complete joke, which is what they should have done. They just printed the article as a lead article showing the genius of Neil Woodford in spotting winners. Unfortunately, nobody was prepared to put in a cent into Rutherford at that higher valuation. So what Woodford did was he put in 20 million quid of money and gave a promissory note on his funds of a further 80 million. He couldn't actually put all the money in at that stage because he was a bit strapped for cash at the time. By doing that, the company was able to tick all the boxes on its working capital requirement. It would have enough money to last for 12 months, and the IPO went ahead. Now, the criminal element here is that Woodford was the only investor in that IPO. So he got to set the price. If he'd been his own money rather than his client's money, he would have said, hang on, Rutherford, I'm the only investor in the IPO. I'm going to set the price at bugger all, and therefore I'll get a bargain. But he didn't. Because it was other people's money, his fund's money, he put it in at a ludicrously high price, which was almost certain to lose money. That was giving away clients' money, but of course it had the benefit for Neil in that he could then mark up the value of his investment in the early big round and then the next small round. So his assets under management went up again. You all got a false idea of the NAV, both of the investment trust and of the unit trust, and he got to bank even bigger fees for his companies because assets under management went up. That's just one story, but there were numerous stories we covered on share profits. Stories of preposterous fundraisers where Woodford went in at ludicrously high levels, even though he was the only backer. You could see that the ships he'd backed were sinking. There was that company that made plastic pallets. Do you remember that one? It was seen as revolutionizing the world of pallets. Now, I can just talk you through the elevator pitch here. You, Andy, need some pallets to put your bricks on at your house. You could go and buy a wooden pallet for £5, but why don't you pay for a plastic pallet with a chip in it for £60? That means that if your pallet is stolen, you can track it, go and find the hoodlums in whichever place the hoodlums hang out, challenge them, and get your pallet back. I think you and I can all see the problems with this particular business plan. But Neil Woodford knew better. And he invested client money. And when the company, not surprisingly, had to issue a series of trading statements admitting that no one in their right mind was buying any of their pallets, and actually nobody was buying them at all, even people in their wrong mind weren't buying, and they were running out of money, what did Woodford do? He put in more money. He caught the falling knife. Why did he do that? And why did he put it in at far higher prices? He's the only backer in town. He could set the price. Why did he do that? Simply to protect his assets under management and to protect his reputation with other people's money. He knew that if the plastic pallet company, whose name I temporarily forget, went bust, the headlines in all the papers would have been another Woodford disaster, and he would have faced more redemptions. So he had to not only deny that there was a problem with redemptions, which we pointed out there had been for well over a year before the final gating, but he had to prevent bad headlines, which would create even more redemptions. There are other things which I raised at that Woodford Patient Capital Trust AGM. That's one of the most enjoyable meetings I've ever been to. And where the board, once again, people like Susan Searle, members of the great and the good, very respectable people, unlike me, I'm a scumbag. They're respectable people. They poo-pooed my concerns. There were a lot of trades of shares between the Patient Capital Trust, which being an investment trust had no issue with redemptions, and the unit trust, which you guys had shares in, where there was a problem with redemptions. And these trades would occur because the unit trusts needed to have stocks that they could sell in order to meet redemptions. And so what they would do is that they would swap stocks which they had, which were illiquid, for either cash in the Patient Capital Trust, because it had cash at one stage, and then it actually took on borrowings, and it used that to buy illiquid shares out of the unit trusts. Now, I raised the issue, oh, how did you price that? And they said, oh, we've gone through compliance consultants and it's all very good and you're a scumbag, you don't understand these things. But I did. The reality is that the unit trusts were forced sellers. So the directors of the Patient Capital Trust should have said, look, they're forced sellers. We'll give them 10p in the pound. Instead, they took mid prices or valuations from independent experts brought in by Neil Woodford. In doing so, they screwed the investment trust, WPCT. They left it to an inevitable fate. It ended up owning almost no listed companies and a whole load of illiquid, cash guzzling listed companies. Well, as each of them ran out of money, they would go back to their original backers and say, we need to do another placing. And Woodford couldn't stand his corner. So the other investors screwed him and said, we'll do another placing, but it's at a much, much lower price. The Patient Capital Trust was diluted. Or some of its investments were such dogs, they just went bust. All of its cash and all of its liquid investments had been transferred over to Woodford's unit trusts to keep them going, to keep them under FCA rules of liquidity. That was apparent well over a year, perhaps even 2 years before the whole ship went down. But nobody did anything. The warnings were all there. But again, nobody did anything. What are the lessons you take from that? Well, one is that the FCA is just completely useless. It cannot say that it was unaware of the warnings. You know, that presentation I gave to 1,500 people, which was put out on the internet for free and which was watched by tens of thousands of people. Are we honestly saying that the FCA, which actually subscribes to share profits, didn't watch it? Of course they did. Absolutely, of course they did. The warnings were all there, but nothing happened. The FCA was aware of Neil Woodford's track record of breaking rules, but nothing happened. So they were aware, they do nothing. We see this, I'm afraid, on not just at Woodford. One of the other series of frauds that I've exposed over the past few years has been the mini bond frauds. People like London and Capital Finance, and most recently the 79th Group, based up near me here in Liverpool. That's 600 million quid, by the way, of private investors' money, normally financially vulnerable and unsophisticated people, which had just been stolen. The FCA has done nothing about a series of these mini bond frauds, a series of Ponzi's. I've written to them about a number of them, the High Street Group, buy to let cars, pointing out these are why these are frauds. You can see it in the accounts, and nothing's happened. And I see it with quoted companies. I was in touch with Andy last week about the most egregious fraud. A company listed on the main market, so regulated by the FCA, whose two principal people are known to have stolen money from a previous employer. There was a forensic accountant's report I published about that. One of them was an undeclared bankrupt. They've been shown to commit perjury in courts in Australia. The company was technically insolvent and out of cash last week, so it put out an announcement. The company's going, I'm happy to be sued by these people because they won't stand a chance in hell against me. It's called Georgina Energy. It put out an announcement about a supposedly massive offtake deal. It took me 25 minutes of internet research to show that the counterparty was just a straw man. It was set up in April. It's got 100 quid in the bank, if that. And the folks behind it are proven failures. So it was a bogus announcement, but that didn't matter. The shares went zooming up and the company did a bailout placing on the back of that. And the FCA was alerted to it by me. It was alerted to the bogus announcement. It's fully cognizant of what's gone on. Myself and the former chairman of Georgina have alerted the FCA to the complete back history of the principles behind this company. They've got all the evidence. They've got the affidavits. They've got the court documents. Have they done anything about it? No, they haven't. So the message is the FCA are useless. They target the wrong people. They don't go after individuals. They go after companies very occasionally. And you can't rely on them to look after your interests. When eventually they do act, as we've seen with Woodford, it has taken years. They are not punishing him. They're not punishing him. And he is not alone. He's honest in saying he'd take 40 million net, a 6 million fine, and a lifetime ban from working again. We'd all do that. That is not a discouragement to commit crime. It's an encouragement to be bad because you'll get away with it. That's one lesson. The lesson about the mainstream press, well, it's one of my hobby horses, but just be careful. Their record of investigating frauds is not entirely a great one. There was one I mentioned, a company called Globo, which was a Greek company listed on AIM. And I'd been after it for a while. And I'd even gone to its headquarters in Athens and recorded videos outside its headquarters before the burly security guards chased me away. Something wasn't right about that building. Well, it was a complete fraud. A friend of mine, Gabriel Grego, compiled a dossier which showed this company was a total fraud. And he was desperate for someone to publish it. He gave it to the FT. The FT didn't publish it because it was too scared. But he tipped off the CEO who sold millions of pounds worth of shares. Eventually, Gabriel discovered me and I published it immediately. The shares were suspended and within a day, the CEO had admitted it was all a fraud. I'm sad to say that was a fraud, 300-400 million quid. Guess how many people the FCA or the Serious Fraud Office has prosecuted regarding that fraud? I think you know the answer, don't you? It's nil. No one has been prosecuted. The CEO, who sold his millions of pounds worth of shares, plus the money he'd stolen from the company before it went up, nothing's happened to him. He posts pictures of him windsurfing in the Aegean on the internet. Nothing has happened. I'm afraid that's the state of regulation in the UK today. So don't trust the FCA. Don't trust the mainstream media. I'm not saying you trust me, but I will at least say it how it is. I'm sorry you've lost money on Woodford. I did warn people, so at least that's not my fault.
What a fantastic point on which to end. Folks, before we do anything else, can we please show our appreciation to a great man with wonderful insights who's got the guts to speak out in the way that he does? Tom, that was absolutely superb. Absolutely superb.
Thank you.
We somehow, I'm thinking this, we somehow need to get you in front of the Treasury Committee.
Well, I'm such a miserable old hermit. I've been to London 3 times in 6 years, but in the past 6 years, I really don't like it at all. But just for you, Andy, if you manage that, I would make it 4 times in 7 years.
Well, thank you, thank you. In all seriousness, you know, Tom, the APPG on investment fraud and fairer financial services that TTF provides the Secretariat for, it did this huge report about the FCA in November last year. It did a follow-up document all about the Woodford scandal and the FCA's handling of it. And we really have been doing all we can, both TTF directly and the All-Party Parliamentary Group, to basically ask the Treasury Committee to open an inquiry on it. And it's quite a rational request to have them open an inquiry because um, the Treasury Committee was basically criticising the FCA for how long it was taking to finalise its report. And it still hasn't, it would seem, completed its journey into exploring what's been going on at the FCA. So well, I think we should keep trying to push for a couple of things. One is for Neil Woodford CBE to be removed. After all, he was honoured it with, well, for services to the economy. And one can't, I know, one can't begin to think about the amount of reputational damage the scandal has caused the sector, and consequentially how much reputational damage has resulted in a reduction in people's willingness to protect to invest. One of the things we know, Tom, from the research we've done with, for example, the group we have here tonight, is we've asked people how do these scandals impact your willingness and your propensity to invest, and it completely and utterly, understandably, takes people's complete confidence away, especially with the Woodford scandal, where these good folks were literally prevented from using the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, statutory protections that Parliament put in place. So we're on very much the same wavelength as you, Tom. If you don't mind,
I would say about the FCA. I
yeah,
mean, to me, there are always calls for from MPs and people like that saying what we need is more regulation. What we need is firmer rules. It's just not true. I mean, the problem is that the FCA and the MPs, they're as thick as each other. I remember during the Quindell fraud that I went to an MP who actually has the misfortune to be my step uncle and also my second cousin once removed. But I won't go into the family details there. And I took it up with him, senior Tory MP, now a Lord, and his constituency was next door to Quindell, which, if you remember, was a £3 billion fraud on the AIM market. And I said, don't you think you should be doing something about this? I mean, after all, some of your constituents work there. A lot of them are invested in it. Everyone had shares in Quindell. There'll be suppliers to the company. Shouldn't you be doing something about it? He goes, oh, no, no, no. The FCA have got it completely under control. Well, of course, they didn't have it under control.
mm,
MPs seem to think that the FCA are basically thinking the right things. They just maybe need a bit more help. But on the other hand, you see that when people like me, who are critics, or even worse, short sellers, expose fraud, MPs rush to it to condemn the short sellers. Now, okay, short sellers may have a financial interest in it. My interest is only I write about it. I never take a short position. But during Quindell, it was, I think, Peter Hain, Vince Cable, and some Tory whose name I've forgotten, actually wrote to the FCA saying, why aren't you investigating these evil short sellers attacking a great British company, Quindell? We've
wow,
seen recently Liam Byrne MP tell the House of Commons that two short sellers, both of whom are friends of mine, Boatman Capital and Viceroy Research, Fraser Perring, were working for the Russian government and needed to be closed down. That resulted in them having their bank accounts suspended, their kids' bank accounts suspended, their businesses disrupted. And actually, they weren't. There was no evidence for it. And Byrne put the question because he was put up to it by a man paid 30 grand by a bunch of fraudsters who Fraser was exposing. And
wow,
that's but he said this, and he was then a Labour MP in opposition. But then Tory ministers rushed to, Penny Mordaunt and others rushed to join in. The pile on the short sellers. Now, what should be happening is that the FCA should be opening an open dialogue with people like me, but also with short sellers, and saying, look, if you dob someone in, if you're one of our accredited panel, we're going to forget the fact you might all be viewed as rogues and nasty pieces of work. We'll actually investigate. And I'll tell you what, if we convict someone, we'll give you a reward.
mm,
Bring us on board. That's what happens in America. The SEC pay money to friends of mine who expose frauds. That would be a way to have a constructive dialogue. The other thing the FCA should be doing is any company that breaks even a small rule should have the book thrown not at the company but at the individuals. That's a zero tolerance approach. Now, if we'd done that with Woodford Investment Management would never have been launched. You guys would all have a load more money. Uh, just saying, you broke 34 rules in your last days at Perpetual and Invesco, you're banned and you're publicly censured for it and you are banned. If you do that and you adopt that zero tolerance approach, then pretty soon things are going to change. You're not going to have people doing bad things because they know what the consequences are. And there would be a lot less financial crime. But we don't have that approach either.
No, you're absolutely right, Tom. It's so good to hear somebody articulate these points in such a clear, compelling, and straightforward way that you do. You're absolutely great, Tom. Thank you. It causes me to conclude that we could have a relatively simple rule book as long as it was robustly enforced and there was consistency in always going after the bad guy. If we had an approach like that, then as you say, people would think twice about doing something dodgy because they would expect that somebody's going to come looking. At the moment, it seems as though you can almost act with impunity if you're some kind of a scammer. Net result, about 40% of all reported crime is fraud of some description. Yet we've still only got about, what is it, 2% of police resource chasing it. There's a complete mismatch between what should be happening and what is going on. I
But it's
hate
the
that.
point. The point you make is that you need the deterrent.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we may say that 40% of crime is fraud. If you had a deterrent where somebody is found guilty, they're publicly exposed. So people who are fraudsters, some of it are in it because they like money. Some of it sort of people stumble into it because they don't want to admit they've screwed up. I think about the finance director at Patisserie Valerie. I don't think that he was one of those people who is like a sort of shark just going for money. He'd rip off his, kids and people like that. I think he just, missed quarterly targets. He tried to cover it up and it snowballed. But if you had a thing, so to punish people, you have to punish them with either custodial sentences, certainly bankrupting them, but also with humiliation so that they can never go down to the golf club again because everyone would be whispering behind their back. If you do that, then you would deter an awful lot of potential fraudsters, so you would have far less crime. But the number of people who are done for frauds is so small. When the Globo fraudsters get away with it, when the Quindell fraudsters get away with it, this was a £3 billion fraud, and no one at all got sanctioned. The FRC thanked me for flagging up a few things in the accounts, which were very ropey. They said the accounts were a complete joke. Well, if your accounts are a complete joke, how the hell
yeah.
are you saying there's no fraud? Who put those accounts together?
This is all really, really compelling stuff. It makes you wonder. Well, I had a conversation with somebody on Zoom a couple of weeks ago, an old school, a proper old school bank manager, who, as you'd expect, was reminding me of things like my word is my bond and so on and so forth. It seems like over the last maybe 30 or 40 years, the sense of integrity that once was, I think, in the system just seems to have vanished away. I know there's other people here, folks, who would love to chip in with a comment or a question. It's been absolutely brilliant, Tom. I've really, really enjoyed listening to you talk. Would anybody like to come in with a comment or a question for? I'm laughing because Ian Duffield spent 0.001 seconds raising his hand there. Ian Duffield, over to you.
Yeah, can we throw okay, Andy?
Loud and clear.
Tom, first of all, thank you very, very much for what has been an absolutely fascinating and full of detail story. Sorry, story is the wrong word. Expose is probably a better word. I recently became aware that when there was the fire sale going on of the illiquid investments, I don't know whether Rutherford won them, but I think the
Rutherford's gone
newfound,
bust.
yeah, there was. I think one of them was also the new nuclear energy program, which was so ridiculous it was practically a joke. And I think that's the one where your comment was deny the laws of physics. But my understanding is that the company or the organisation, I think there was a multiple purchasers clubbed together to do it. The ones that bought those assets at a ridiculously knocked down price and then immediately sold them for quite a large amount of money, that Woodford was actually advising the buyers of
Yep,
that
that's
sale.
correct.
Have you got any sort of further detail on that? Because that seems to me that there was my guess would be that money was changing hands under the table, both to Woodford, and my guess would also be to people in Link Fund Solutions who were arranging that, and I'd be very surprised if it wasn't.
I don't think, to be fair to Link, I doubt very much that they were making anything out of it. I think they just wanted to sort of help dig themselves out of the hole by proving these things had any value at all. Was Woodford paid a consultancy fee? Possibly. Yeah. If so, was he conflicted? Of course he was. Should he have been doing it? No. Did anyone give a damn about what Woodford did? No. I think Link people Link was asleep at the wheel in not addressing the issue of liquidity. It was asleep at the wheel, just like the FCA, in not addressing how ticking certain boxes didn't address the issue of liquidity. But was it, it was, so it was an enabler by its uselessness, just as the FCA was. But let's not forget who the real villain is. The real villain is Woodford.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Ian.
Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah. Thank
Tom.
you. Thanks, Tom.
We'll squeeze in one or two more. We'll squeeze in one or two more and make good use of the time we've got with Tom. Would anybody else like to come in with any comments or questions before we wrap up this Woodford part of the meeting, and then I'll formally wrap up the whole meeting? Please do jump in, Deborah. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Yep.
Just a comment about you talked about members of the FCA need to be a bit more rock and roll because they're too virtuous. But in the same breath, that's probably why people like Woodford, because he is a bit more rock and roll, he's the person that can actually get people to invest money because of his image and everything. And because we're unsophisticated investors, we do follow the lines of the mainstream media. And to all intents and purposes, he had quite a good track record because he was successful at his previous company. And so people did follow him, I think, and were quite happy because we thought he was a good bet.
I think you make a valid point, that when you meet con men, I'm not saying Neil Woodford's a con man, he's after all a CBE and a good friend of the great and the good. But when you meet con men in my world of listed companies, they're very rarely sort of shy, retiring accountants. They always have a bit of pizzazz about them because their job is not necessarily to run a business, but it's to promote the shares, it's to persuade you to buy them. And that was part of Woodford's job. His job was to persuade you that you should buy more units in his unit trust. So yes, he was charismatic. He is charismatic. He speaks well and he's eloquent. Even when he was calling me out at his AGM, I thought, well, you're quite a charming fellow. You're doing this with some panache. And that is true. But the FCA may have been swayed by that. I'm not suggesting that the FCA should have people working for it who are exciting, but I write quite a bit about groupthink. My late uncle Christopher Booker wrote the definitive book on groupthink.
Right.
The FCA certainly does have a groupthink. It believes that, for instance, it should spend an enormous amount of time doing studies into DEI and ensuring that there's no gender pay gap in the financial services. It's not really what it's for, but they have that groupthink. And the groupthink is also that as long as people follow the rules, that's what we need to be checking. And the only way that they're going to get out of that groupthink is, I think, by opening dialogue with uh, people who don't have that groupthink. Now, one of my best friends is a short seller called Lucian Myers, and uh, would he work for the FCA? No. Would the FCA consider offering him a job? No. In fact, the FCA investigated him for 3 years, and in the end, having ruined his life, discovered that he'd done absolutely nothing wrong. This is over a company called Panandean Resources, and they ruined his life for 3 years. But Lucian is a maverick, former stockbroker. He's a maverick and all sorts of things. He's a very funny guy, godfather to my son, fellow supporter of West Ham. The man can do no wrong. But the FCA would never engage with Lucian. But it should. That's the sort of person that it should, because he knows, he can see the wrongdoing. He's exposed so many frauds over the years. But they can't, because he's outside the groupthink.
Wow. Great conversation, Tom. Thank you so much. We've got time for one more. If anybody would like to come in, I'll just go on gallery view so I can see everybody properly if I do that. Okay, I think we're good. In which case, I'll go to Tom in just a moment for any final thoughts you'd like to make about Woodford scandal, regulatory failure, or anything else Tom would like to finish his session on. Tom Winifred, may I first of all, before you give us your final words, can I just invite everybody to once again show our appreciation to you for giving us time and these insights. That was particularly good, Tom. The fact that you can do this off the cuff like that just goes to show that you must be thinking about these things at least 24 hours a day. But Mr. Tom Winifred, your final thoughts, please, then we'll wrap up the session. Thank you.
I don't think about it 24 hours a day. I do, although I like to paint myself as being a miserable hermit who does nothing but expose fraud. I do actually have a wife and various children, and one day hope to have a goat farm as well. So I have many other things to do with my life. Thank you for being so nice and from saying such nice things about me. I won't tell anyone because it might damage your reputation. I leave you just with a couple of thoughts. It is one, the real scandal of the FCA is that it tells you that it protects your money. If it was honest and said, look, we're bloody useless, then that would be one thing. But they're dishonest because they don't protect your money. They don't engage with the right people, and they don't go after the right targets. And secondly, to that very nice lady who asked me a question, I try to say that in a non-sort of sexist, patronising way, but that nice question, you're not financially unsophisticated in believing the Deadwood press. I think you just have to have worked within the Deadwood press to understand the sort of corruption at the heart of it. And if you've got time, let's tell you one brief story from my time on the Evening Standard. I was exposing an insider dealing ring. And in the end, I managed to get a couple of people at a fund management group sacked and a senior PR man sacked. But I wanted to go further. But the PR firm came into the offices of the Evening Standard. This is when newspapers mattered. And they called the city editor in for a meeting. And they called in the deputy city editor, Joanne Hart of Midas. And they called in a couple of other people. And at the end of it, they left. And I was called in and they said, you're not going to write about this anymore. Why not? And the truth was, we've been told you'll get no cooperation from the PR agency at all if you let that lunatic carry on exposing what's going on. And I'm afraid that is, I remember sitting there hammering out a story with the PR man behind my back, suggesting, well, can't you just change that? That's just corruption. But that is the way that the mainstream press operates. And in saying all these things, it's why I'm never going to work for a newspaper again. But I wouldn't want to work for a newspaper. I don't think you're foolish in believing the mainstream media. Maybe we can do another session, Andy, where I can really let rip on the corruption of Fleet Street. I'd be delighted to do that.
I think that's a date, Tom. I think that's it. You've just used the C word, the corruption word. I'm going to end the session with with a quote I refer to very frequently, Robert F. Kennedy. Folks, those of you who've seen me talk about this before know that my thoughts go to this quote probably every few days, at least every few days, because the work we do trying to expose bad stuff is actually quite difficult and sometimes even a little bit dangerous. I don't think Tom was joking when he talked about the death threats he's received, for example, right? This has just come to mind because Tom pursues the word corruption. Robert F. Kennedy. Allow me just to quickly mention that I reckon, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that there was something good going on in the 60s, a sense of enlightenment, a sense of hope. There were all kinds of good people around, like I think Robert F. Kennedy, who had a more vision-orientated understanding of what the world could be if we could all learn to be honest and get on with each other. I say that as somebody who thinks that in so many ways, society standards are just going down the tube right now, and it's really quite a worry. I'm standing like an old man and a parent because I am an old man, and I am a parent. But anyway, let me just get this out there. So, Robert F. Kennedy, every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. Mr. Tom Winifred, for being the kind of person that you are, routinely speaking up and speaking out, you're serving society far, far more than you probably ever will give yourself the credit for, or frankly, anybody else ever will either. And I reckon the chances of you getting a CBE, sir, are probably even smaller than the chances of you winning that 100 meters sprint at the next Olympics that you made.
Whilst I might aspire to the sprint, the honour system is so utterly corrupt that though I'm delighted that we've got rid of Julie Mayer's MBE, the honour system is so utterly corrupt. I wouldn't want to be associated with it.
That speaks a man with a principled look on the world. Mr. Tom Winifred, thank you very much for joining us. We'll wrap it up there, folks. But can we once again show appreciation, Tom? I don't know about you all, but A, I learned a lot, and B, I found that very, very interesting indeed. Tom, you're a great ally. Thank you all. Good evening, Tom. Good evening, all. Thank you. Bye-bye.